Does your name sound a little Dutch? Something like Van Dyke, de Vries, de Jong, or Vandenberg? If it does, your family may have left the Netherlands in one of two big waves. The first in the 1600s, when Dutch names spread across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And the second, after the Second World War, when families moved to North America, Australia, and New Zealand for space and opportunity. So, is your name one of the ones that traveled? Hey, hoi, welcome to the Dutch door. Kom erin. Ga je mee? Number 10. De boer. The boer means the farmer, and it's exactly that kind of family that moved the most. Picture the flat fields of Friesland and Drenthe, two provinces in the Netherlands, and families who knew how to work the land. In the 1900s, many of them packed everything they owned into a few wooden crates and sailed to the American Midwest and Canada, where farmland was cheap and endless. If you meet a de boer in Iowa or Alberta today, there's a good chance their great-grandparents came from a tiny village surrounded by cows and wind in the Netherlands. Number 9. Meijer. Meijer started as a name for someone who ran an estate, basically the person in charge. A lot of these families came from Drenthe and Overijssel, regions full of small farms and old manors. When they immigrated, the name traveled easily because Meijer looked like the German Meyer, so clerks overseas barely changed it. That's why you'll see the name spread across the US and Canada, carried by people whose ancestors once kept the books and held the keys to the landlord's property. Number 8. Smit, or Smits. Smit is the Dutch version of smith, someone who works with metal. In old villages in Gelderland and Overijssel, the blacksmith was basically the mechanic, the welder, and the problem solver, all in one. When smiths started appearing abroad, some were Dutch smits, whose name simply slipped into English spelling. So that Smith in South Africa or Smits in Michigan might not come from Britain at all. The family could be Dutch, and the old village forge is part of their story. Number 7. Visser. Visser means fisherman, and the name hugs the coast. Think of Friesland, Noord-Holland, and the old fishing towns along the North Sea. Many fishers left after the fishing industry collapsed in the late 1800s. Their skills carried them abroad. You'll find the name today in South Africa and Australia, usually tied to families who once lived right next to the water, repairing nets and listening to the storms roll in. Number 6. Bakker. Bakker is a baker, one of the most classic Dutch names. A lot of these families came from Friesland and Groningen, where every village had its own little bakery with that warm flour smell. When Dutch migrants headed to Canada and the US, many Bakker families literally brought their trade with them. Some opened bakeries, others went into farming, but the name always kept that bread and butter feeling. Meet a Bakker abroad, and there's usually a story about someone who woke up early every day and fed an entire neighborhood. Number 5. Van Dijk, the Van Dijks. This one means from the dike, and that already tells you where it starts. Families lived right beside those long earth walls in Zuid-Holland, Noord-Holland, and Utrecht, the places where the Dutch fought the sea for centuries. When they immigrated, the I sound confused English clerks, so Van Dijk often turned into Van Dyke. That's why the name pops up in Michigan, Canada, and Australia. People whose ancestors once lived so close to the water, they could hear it hitting the dike at night. Number 4. Van den Berg, Vandenberg. Van den Berg means from the hill, which is funny because the Netherlands barely has any. But regions like Gelderland and Utrecht do have some sandy ridges and little rises where villages formed. Families with this name spread early to South Africa during the Cape era, and later to North America. Over time, the spaces disappeared. Van den Berg became Vandenberg, but the name still points back to a small, slightly higher piece of land in a very flat country. Number 3. De Vries. This one simply means the Frisian, so the story writes itself. Most De Vries families started in Friesland or Groningen, speaking their own language and living in wide-open northern landscapes. They immigrated in big numbers to the Midwest, especially Iowa and Minnesota, where other Frisian families were already settling. So if you meet a De Vries in North America today, chances are they come from a line of people who were proudly Frisian long before they were ever Dutch. Number 2, Jansen, or Jansen with 2 S's. Jansen means son of Jan, and every region had someone named Jan, especially Gelderland, North Brabant, and Limburg, because the name was already everywhere. Lots of unrelated Jansen families lived in different waves. Many went to Michigan and Wisconsin, joining Dutch religious communities there. So when you run into a Jansen abroad, there's no single village story. The name could come from dozens of places, all tied together by one very common father named Jan. And the number 1 most common one, de Jong, the young. The young means literally the young, and in old villages, if 2 people had the same first name, like a father and son both named Gerard, the younger one was simply called the young Gerard, which eventually became Gerard de Jong. Because it's the most common surname in the Netherlands, it shows up in almost every province. And because of that, it's also the one that traveled everywhere. The US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and families who moved through to the East Indies as well. That's why you'll see so many de Jongs abroad. It's the name that left from everywhere and arrived everywhere. Did your name make the list? Or do you have one of those super Dutch names no one outside of the Netherlands can say, like Van der Scheur, Van der Schinkel, Van der Schrik, Van Schijndel, anything with that impossible SCH or that hard G? Drop your name in the comments. I'd love to see the toughest ones.